Good morning. It's good to see each one of you here this morning. He did not do that again. Jeff mentioned the picnic at our house. We've got a practically new smoker now. We'll see how it works. I won't tell you the backstory on that, but we're hopeful. John Kissermoy sends his love to this congregation every single time we converse, which is several times a week. And I don't say a whole lot about it, but I did want to pass that along this morning. We are still have to meet as an eldership, but we're working to increase his monthly support. There are 2 more preachers there that are working at different congregations that he wants to try to help. That, if you remember his story, he is responsible for those 2 guys going to the school of preaching. And one of them has a congregation, and it's against the law in Kenya for you to hold a job and preach, which is obviously an effort to tamp down the whole process. And so they live on practically nothing. And we are sending 350 or whatever adds to that each month right now to John, and he's sharing that with these other 2 guys. And they are bit by inflation just like we are. And so I've been in contact with a couple of people, but I'm going to get in contact with the other congregations that have helped. And the goal is to try to raise his support to 800, which will help the other 2 guys out too. And they are getting rain, and the crops look good. I've got gobs of pictures. There's a guy going over there that's a civil engineer, and he and a friend of his are financing their trip over, but they're going to do some things that will be helpful to that community. And I didn't know this until this week, but the wastewater from the water treatment system is an issue for them. And because they're getting rain, they're not using it much. And so this guy that's a civil engineer is going to rectify that, along with a long list of other things that he sent me. And so hopefully that will go well. And things are better than they were. He had a cow die. We sent him the money to buy another cow. He didn't have any cows before we sent him money for cows. But that's his only way of supporting himself other than what we send him. And so I could get up here every single time I get up here and do that. And I could tell Jeff to do that every single time he did that, and it still wouldn't cover the number of times he sends this love to the congregation. So keep him in that work there in your prayers. Based on the pictures, it looks like Ekamea, which is the name of the church he's at, is about 50 or 60 members, and he's working on a way to get his biological family, which blood relatives, about 50 of those there. And so that would double the size of that congregation. And so he wants me to help with that too, and I have an idea. I don't know if it'll work or not. We'll see. Anyway, we are studying Colossians chapter 2. I got up here without my eyes. Last week, we covered number 9, what happened to the law of Moses with the crucifixion of Christ and his defeat of death. And we had a Bible study Tuesday night, and the people we were studying with had never heard of the dispensations of law. And so we talked about this. But the law of Moses ended with the crucifixion of Christ and the establishment of the church. And everybody, no matter what their race or their nationality or sex, there's only 2, but we don't need to go there, are amenable to Christ's law. And whether they accept that or not, it's their call. But there's a stiff price to pay if you don't accept it. And it's our call because we're free moral agents. But we talked about these things last week, and the law of Moses ended. And so as we serve God and try to do His will to the best of our ability, the law of Moses is not applicable to us. We can't go back and pull things from the law of Moses and say that that's what we're to do today. The moral laws that were part of the Ten Commandments are repeated in Romans, and so the New Testament has everything we need to live. And we talked about the idea that we know what we know, and we can understand what God is by study of the Old Testament. Without it, we would truly be lacking a lot of things we need to be faithful. And so we discussed those things last week. So we're on number 10, I think. What were the influences mentioned in this chapter trying to cheat them of the reward? What was one of the big reasons Paul wrote the Colossians? What was one of his concerns? Pagan worship. What else?
Falsely so-called philosophies.
Right. How does their situation differ from ours? Or does it?
Materials changed a little bit.
People trying to be Christians and trying to be faithful to Christ have a lot of external influences, and we see them all the time. If you listen to the news, if you see what's going on in society, we're disgusted by it. We are repulsed by it. And yet, when you get out among your friends and you begin to talk to them, not so much in this area, it'd be rare, but if you lived in other places, you would run into liberal ideology, or literally it's Marxist ideology now, that's trying to influence you to be different. And in Canada now, it's against the law to try to impress your spiritual beliefs on someone else. You go to jail for it. And we're not too far from that ourselves if we don't change horses at the top. And so if we find ourselves in that position, what do we got to do? We got to be faithful to Christ. That's what he's impressing on these people in this passage. He wanted to show them that they were complete in Christ, and some of the competing ideologies was the Jews didn't believe that Christ was the Son of God. And so they had a lot of Jewish population there. They had to deal with that in the marketplace or whoever they associated with. And then they had to deal with ideas like the angels had some prominence and that they needed to pray to angels. They had to deal with that. Rhonda mentioned pagan ideology. All of that was there. And so they had a lot of things that could distract them from attaining their eternal reward. And he's warning them not to go there and to realize that they got everything they need in Christ. He spent time showing the fullness of Christ, that Christ had full authority, that he was God, and that that's all they needed. And then he gets to this section here in Colossians chapter 2, 16 through 18. He says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshiping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up in his fleshly mind." Here are people that are influential in the community, and they're trying to force some of the Jewish traditions on the Colossians. They've got that pressure. They've got the pressure of people who would push them to worship angels. They've got pressure of people who put on a false humility and tried to make a big show of their religion and try to influence people along that line. And he's telling them, pay no attention. Keep your mind focused on Christ. And that's a big responsibility. We all can fall to that temptation. We all have fallen to that temptation at some point or other in our lives. As we grow more spiritually mature, it's something that we should become more hardened on. And we need to guard, though, even if we're, I don't know, I will say that, reflect on myself. You know, a lot of us been Christians a long time, and a lot of us are getting older. And you would assume with that spiritual maturity is coming with that. But even then, if we subject ourselves to temptations and false ideologies and immerse ourselves in things that aren't wholesome, we can cost ourselves. And so all of us need to guard against that. An example of that would be Peter. Peter walked with Christ. He listened to Christ teach. He was an impetuous guy. He was quick to make decisions, and sometimes he made bad decisions. And Christ told him that before the cock crowed thrice, he would deny him. And so he did, even though he said, "I'm not going to do that." Why did he do it? What caused Peter to do that? Was that imprinted in his DNA? He gave in to the pressures of the moment. He was in a hostile situation, and he was challenged, "You are a follower of Christ?" And he said, no, I'm not. He gave in to the pressures of the moment. Yes?
You know, when we think about the church, as you pointed out, there's a lot of pressure on us. It's interesting as you look around at the religious community that considers themselves to be Christian. It's obvious to see they're being influenced by society, and there's certain societal trends. Denominational groups are losing numbers rapidly, and it's not just because of COVID. They're just checking out of religion. It's convenient for us. We might say, well, it is a cultural problem, and it is. This just goes to show we cannot try to be like the culture, because that's what happens. We will be odd, and we will actually be, it'll be confrontational, not that we intend to be confrontational, but we've got to stand in distinction. We've got to be the influencers rather than being the influenced.
Amen.
And that is confrontational in nature.
Right. You see and hear of people on social media that you know to be members of the church get on there and support some of the cultural rot that we are experiencing. And you don't want to do that. I mean, your influence is strong. And one of the lessons this week in Bible school is on character. And what piece of fishing that matches up with, I think, is the rod and reel. But it is about character. And we work all our lives to build our character and build our influence. And one false step can break all that down completely. And I don't know where this lady's from, but Kim has read this stuff to me. She's taken a position that's absolutely wrong with regard to homosexuality. You can't do it. You've got to stand where the Bible stands. You've got to speak where the Bible speaks. And people have got to see you doing that, because that's your influence on people. I mentioned Peter. Go to Galatians chapter 2, 12 through 16. Peter is an apostle now. He is led by the inspiration of the Spirit. He speaks what the Spirit gives him to speak. But here shows that the apostles were not infallible. They were still human. They still had free moral agency. The passage reads, "For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, If thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of the Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. Peter is succumbing, and Barnabas is succumbing to the Judaizing teachers' pressure here in Galatia to the issues that the Judaizing teachers put. Circumcision was one of those, recognition of holy days and so on and so forth. And Peter was an apostle. He had been preaching a long time. He was the one who took the gospel to the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10. And so this just shows you what can happen if you're under social pressure. Peter was a great man. He certainly was, but he made mistakes, as do we all. And Paul stands up to him here and calls him out because this pressure on the Galatians were causing problems. They didn't want to do what the Jews were pushing them to do, but the Judaizing teachers were trying to make them believe that if they were going to be Christians, they had to do this. It was so serious that Paul went back to Jerusalem in Acts 15 to get corroboration of his position because doubt was being cast on his official position. They were trying to say he was not an apostle. And so he made a trip back to Jerusalem to carry a letter back to them stating what was the truth. And Peter stood on that day and spoke. And so even Peter can show that it's possible to fall. And we've got to be conscious of that ourselves and stay with the truth and teach the truth and live it, more importantly. Number 11, for the church to grow and thrive, what is critical to the body? The head. His point in Colossians, the letter to the Colossians up to this point, is the fullness of Christ, that he has full authority, that he is the head of the church. And so he makes the point in Colossians 2:19, and not holding the head, from which all body by joints, bands have nourishment ministered and knit together, increaseth with the increase of God. He's trying to show them that we are absolutely dependent on Christ as the head. Howard makes this point a lot about the body and how all the parts work together. The head is what drives all that. The head tells my fingers to move because I said move them in this. I mean, that's the way it works. If you look at Christ, he's the head of the church, and the church is dependent on him for the knowledge and the truth that makes the church work. And we're the individual members. We're all the body parts that make the church work. The brain makes all that work together in unison. And if everybody is operating in unison, then the church is going to grow. And the church is absolutely dependent on the head for life, function, and direction. It cannot live spiritually without being in perfect harmony with Christ. And so it's all of our responsibilities to get ourselves in harmony with the gospel. And we can't hold positions that are foreign to it. People see that. And we're going to talk about character as we move into chapter 3, and I won't go there. But if we say one thing and do another, what's that a statement to the public about? We're hypocritical. We have a false humility, which is spoken of here. And so we've got to always be conscious of the influence that we have on our friends and neighbors. Ephesians 4:14 through 16, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. We mentioned as we started talking about Colossians, there's a lot of similarities between Ephesians and Colossians. And this is the same teaching, but as you look at this passage here, he talks about us being henceforth no more children tossed to and fro and being deceived. How do we keep from doing that? Study. If we've got the truth committed to heart and we continue to work on it and we continue to study, we're going to grow. And not allowing ourselves to be tossed about comes from having the right knowledge to deal with it. And it's important that we focus on that. We're told to study for a reason. And those truths that we learn through that study make us a more harmonious part of Christ's body and makes us much more effective. Number 12. What does Paul tell them to avoid? We'll do 12 and 13 together. The number 13, what will be the end of those that worship their way? Right. What will be the end of those who do it their way? Destruction. He tells them to avoid falling to the rudiments of the world. Colossians 2, 20 through 23. Wherefore, if you be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why as though living in the world are you subject to ordinances? Touch not, taste not, handle not, which all are to perish with the using, after the commandments and doctrines of men, which things have indeed a show of wisdom and will worship and humility and neglecting of the body, not in any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. The rudiments of the world are the teachings of the world. And if you look at what we're subjected to today, they were subjected to these same things then. Even the things that we're subjected to today, they were subjected to then. Pagan worship included a lot of the homosexuality and things that we are constantly force-fed if we pay any attention to media. And he's saying, if you're dead with Christ to the world, why are you trying to go there? And of course, the Colossian church was faithful. He praised them as he starts the letter. But he's warning them not to go where this stuff is and to keep themselves clean of it. Proverbs 30, verse 6 says, add thou not unto his words, lest he reprove thee, and thou be found a liar. We have a pattern to live the Christian life. We have a pattern to worship. If we decide that we need to add an instrument to our worship or any numerous other things that men have added to it, what are we guilty of? Number one, we're falling to the rudiments of the world, but we're guilty of adding to, correct? We're adding to the pattern that Christ has given us, and when we do that, we put ourselves outside Christ because he gave us everything we needed. And
I think, in keeping with what he's saying here, the idea of it looks good. If you're not familiar with the word, someone says we need to have better singing, better spirituality. Let's get better singers. This will increase. Well, it has an appearance of wisdom.
yeah,
And the only way to discern that is with the standard.
right. And we've got to be conscious of that. When I was reading this, it came to my mind of the ascetics and the extremes of that group. And there was one group that would go around beating themselves with a whip to the point they cut their back, all in the idea that they would be more holy. And you might look at that and say, man, that guy's dedicated. And you might look at that and say, I ain't doing that. I'm not going to be a part of that. Every year in the Philippines during Easter, there are people have themselves nailed to a cross. And that is a show. That's what it's talking about here. That's not what's commanded or expected of us. But it makes a show, and it looks like humility, but it's false. And I even believe these people have good intentions. But that is not the pattern. And as good intent as those people have, it's false. It hurts the word. It hurts the truth. It hurts the church. There are people who look at it and say, they're a bunch of nuts. I'm not going there. How much damage has the Catholic Church done over the centuries to the truth? How many people are not Christians or don't believe in God because of the abuses and the excesses of the Catholic Church? It's had a monster effect. But if we go back to the Word and see what the true church looks like, it's nothing like what you see. And so we need to be armed. We need to understand these things. We need to be able to explain them. We need to be able to show people the simple truth. And the only thing that stands in the way of the simplicity of it is our own selfishness and wanting to have it our way. When I say our, I'm talking about people, not the church. But you get my drift.
Mike, if you're the average person out in the world and you look at religion and you're trying to figure out, should I be a part of that? Look at all the division. Look at Jim Jones and what he did. Look at that bunch that were trying to catch on that comic that committed suicide. Look at the Catholic Church and all their crusades and the people they killed. Who in the world would want to be a part of anything like that? See, I think that's the way some people look at religion. That those people are nothing but a bunch of nuts, but they're not following the Word of God.
Right. And there's no question what you said is true. There was a death cult in Kenya just in the past few months where people did a Jim Jones type thing in the name of religion. And it gives religion a bad name. And it gives the agnostics and the atheists a leg up because they can point and say, look what a bunch of nuts they are. And what's sad when you come to that is there are people who are members of the church that will argue with you about theistic evolution saying it has to be true. And they have not done the research to figure out that that can't be true. But they're willing to go along because someone has said, this is science. All this has been covered in the past week or two in different lessons, but we need to be ready to take these things on. Galatians 1, 6 through 9, and we'll finish this up here with these two passages. Paul says, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. As we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed. The Judaizing teachers were trying to influence the Galatians to add tenets of Judaism to their worship, and they were saying that you can't do it unless you do. And Paul's telling them, he said, if you do anything other than I've told you to do, or if anyone brings anything to you other than what I've told you to do, let him be accursed. Those are strong words. You look at the idea of adding to or taken from, that's as plain as you can get, because he had given them the gospel. In Galatians 5:4, Paul said, Christ has become of no effect unto you, whosoever of you are justified by the law, you are fallen from grace. Plain words. If you try to be a Christian and go back and take these old things that the Judaizing teachers are trying to make you do, you fall from grace. That applies to us today, and it's not Judaizing teachers that affect us, but it is the world, it is denominationalism, it is our religious friends that attempt to try to influence us their way. And it is an area that we need to be extremely strong on. And we need to be able to defend the truth with that regard. Any comments or questions on Colossians 2? It's taken me 3 weeks. I didn't plan that. But we're here. So I gave Colossians 3 out last week, or 2 weeks ago. We'll start out by reading the chapter. If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. For which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience. in the which ye also walked sometime when ye lived in them. But now ye also put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. Where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond or free, but Christ is all and in all. Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another and forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And above all these things put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also ye are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And whatsoever ye do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God and the Father by him. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as it is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in the singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily, as to the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he hath done, and there is no respect of persons. So number one, what is the focus of a faithful Christian? Seek those things which are above. Colossians 3:1 and 2 we just read, but if you be risen with Christ, which that's what Christians are, they've been buried in baptism, and the old man of sin dies, new man comes up, and he is now risen with Christ. Seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. Human tendency is to see the things around him and like them. And a lot of times those things get in the way of seeking those things which are above. Eddie, I'm going to let you make your comment because we're about out of time.
I like doing verse-by-verse studies. I've been doing that for long. But sometimes you have to step back and look at the whole. When we read this chapter as a whole, we will get a lot out of it going verse by verse. It's a blueprint. Perfect blueprint for being a Christian. It spells out every aspect of our Christian walk, our Christian life. And sometimes I think we fail to see all of that. We're so focused. Sometimes you just have to step back and look.
Yeah, I agree with you. The questions I wrote on this chapter are kind of a step back look at what the chapter is saying rather than getting into each little detail. And we need to keep the eye on the whole picture. And certainly understanding what Paul was trying to do as he wrote the book of Colossians helps us understand what he's saying and helps us apply it to ourselves. We'll finish number 1 next week. Thanks for your attention.